I'm going to introduce you to your next speaker, and of course, your next speaker is Mr. Tim Sullivan. Tim began his career as a scriptwriter, not a script writer, that's something completely different, a script writer with the filmmaker Derek Jarman before joining Granada Television. He became a director at the company. His production credits at Granada included Coronation Street, the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes with Jeremy Brett, and of course Cold Feet, favourite of mine. He has worked extensively as a screenwriter both in the UK and the US. His screen credits include A Handful of Dust, Where Angels Fear to Tread, Letters to Juliet, and Jack and Sarah, which of course he wrote and directed. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Tim Sullivan. Cheers.
There's a widely held belief in the film industry that writers shouldn't really be let out of their rooms, shouldn't be heard, shouldn't be seen, and certainly shouldn't speak. That's because they're thought to be boring and that they never know when to stop. So I'm going to spend the next 2.5 hours proving that's not the case. I never set out to be a screenwriter. It was really just to avoid my father's dastardly plan to make me a lawyer. No offense to any lawyers in the room. But it was something I simply couldn't, contemplate. So I accidentally fell into screenwriting. Hence the title Screenwriting and the Fear of Being Found Out. It's something that sort of hasn't left me, and I think doesn't leave many writers. It's that it's not just the fear of getting a call from the producer that says, Tim, so we got your script, we read it, we still think it's a great idea, but the real problem is the writing is shit. And, have you been told this before? How long have you got away with this? Because we're quite surprised that no one has actually brought you up on this before. It's not only that fear, it's also the fear that your idea, when you initially have it, will be found out later down the road, that it won't stand up, that it won't have the legs. Everything starts with an idea, however vague, but how good is that idea? And how do you judge it? What are the criteria for judging what is a good idea? Because a good screenplay needs the power to entertain, it needs the power to make you laugh, cry, preferably both at the same time. But what are the criteria that actually give the idea staying power? Everyone has had an idea for a movie at some point in their lives. After people ask me what I do, and I tell them, I then get what you would call the occupational hazard question. For doctors at dinner parties, it's, I'm a doctor. The next question is, oh, really? I've got this terrible pain in my side. Or, do you think I'm too young to have a colonoscopy? And this is all before the starter. If you're a lawyer, someone will say, you're a lawyer. Oh, I'm going through this terrible divorce. I've got a couple of questions. If you're a car mechanic, I've got a problem with my timing. Of course, that could be also for a comedian, who knows. With a screenwriter, it's, I've got this fantastic idea for a movie. You try not to let your eyes glaze over, and you very politely say, oh, what is that? And they embark on this incredibly passionate discourse on why this article they've read, or this book they've read, should be a fantastic movie. I'm then expected to put everything on hold that I'm doing, and dedicate the next 9 months of my life writing their brilliant idea, which is a cross between Slumdog Millionaire and Spider-Man. And when you point out that actually it's really not either your cup of tea or it's not really going to sustain, this familiar look to the seasoned screenwriter of rejection comes across their face. At the same time, you have to be very careful and pay attention. There's a story I love about Tom Hooper, a film director. And his mother, I imagine it wasn't the first time, his mother went to a reading of a small fringe stage play. And she came home and she said, Tom, I have found your next movie. And he went, yeah, right, Mum. And she said, no, you've got to read this, take it away with you. And he wearily takes away this play. And of course, never reads it. Every time he sees him, she says, why haven't you read the play? And then one day, knowing he's going to see her later on, he does indeed sit down to read the play. And he thinks it's wonderful. And it was turned into the movie, The King's Speech, which won 4 Oscars, including one for Tom as the best director. What's the lesson to be learned from this? Listen to Tom Hooper's mother, if you need to. Okay, so let's put this to the test. How many people in this room have at some point in their lives had A great idea for a movie. Hands up, please. I promise I will not ask you what it is. Or maybe I will afterwards. Come and see me. A bit thin on the ground at the moment. Now, some of you will have an idea, but how far will you take it? You know, how do you know that all the effort that you're going to put in is going to end up in a movie that's worth being made? If it's a book, the first two movies I co-wrote were English books that already have been read and were, stood the test of time. So you've kind of got, even more in the end force, so you've kind of got good people on your side. Why is it gone like that? This is my daughter's iPad. Sorry, I've got to click and flick at the same time, and it's quite confusing. The first film that I wrote and directed, it's all right, you're 41, don't ask how old I am. If you're 41, you say you're 41, it's all you're shutting off. The first film that I wrote and directed came about after I made a small observation at work. A bloke that was ordinary sort of looking Joe, brought his 6-month-old daughter into work because his care arrangements had gone wrong. And the effect on the female colleagues at work was extraordinary. Suddenly this ordinary bloke was attractive, responsible, paternal. He was just a completely different person. So I thought there's something in this, but all I had was man brings baby to work. That's not a movie. So a few years later, a sort of extraordinary and terrible thing happened to me. I got married. And no, that didn't come out right. An extraordinary thing happened, and then something terrible happened. When I got married, this is actually true, my father, outside the church, collapsed and died in my arms, which is, a kind of shocking and extraordinary thing. And everyone, you couldn't write up the movie. We had this brass band, this St. Louis band. We were in a little village in Wales, and we walk up the hill with the band playing, and we're walking behind. And as I'm giving my father CPR and morning tales, it's not what you're expected to do on your wedding day. They're playing When the Saints Go Marching In. Now, you couldn't write that because people wouldn't believe you. But it's not a movie. But a week later, I was talking to my agent, Anthony Jones, and he said to me, God, this is terrible, what a shocking thing. Obviously, honeymoons had to be cancelled and all sorts of things had to happen like that because we had to do the funeral. And he said, you really need to write about this. And I thought, oh yeah, maybe I do. I mean, I don't know what, but maybe I should write about this. Dad dies at wedding. No, okay, move on. So a few years later, when you lose a parent, it's a pretty profound thing in your life, and it informs for a few years how you sort of view everything, how you think about everything. And my wife became pregnant, and this got me thinking back to man-baby work, and then it got me thinking back to this is a great time in someone's life. Like when I got married, it's a great time, it's a great event. Something terrible happens that shouldn't happen in that circumstance. So I came up with an idea of a young couple about to have a baby, fantastic. Moving into a new house, wonderful aspirations, and then I killed the child. And for me, Dad dies at wedding, man brings baby into work, I get married. Thematically, I had my movie. It was called Jack and Sarah, and it was about a man who had a great time in his life, at a time of joy and aspirations. Something really appalling happens, and how does he deal with it? How does he struggle with his grief? Funny enough, a few years later, I recommended to my mother that she go and see the new Richard Curtis movie. So off she went, I thought it would cheer her up, she's still a bit miserable. And a couple of days later, I got an irate phone call from my mother. Not an uncommon experience, as it happens. And she said, what on earth did you make me go and see that for? I said, what are you talking about? The movie was 4 weddings and a funeral. And what I didn't know, because I hadn't seen the movie, was that Simon Callow dropped dead in the middle of the film, at a wedding. So my mother goes, how do you think that made me feel? Go and see a movie, laughing away, someone drops dead. And I found myself thinking, I wonder if Anthony told Richard about my wedding, in the way that lots of people were told. And Richard thought, God, that's a really terrible thing, how shocking, that's really awful. But like writers sort of magpies do, he stored it in the back of his mind. And then a few years later, he had a context within which to use that scene. So, you know, life is stranger than fiction. So observation is good and it's important, but it doesn't always work, as I have experienced at my cost. Many years ago, I was working with a writer friend of mine, James, who happens to be gay, and we were trying to find a project, and we walked into a supermarket, and he said to me, by the way, I'm heterosexual. We walked into the supermarket, and he said to me, do you mind if we don't shop together? Now, we're buying dinner, but we're going to cook together. Okay, why don't we want to shop together? Well, if we shop together, people will think we're gay. But you are, surely I'm the one who should be upset. Anyway, this is like red rag to a bull, so I stormed down the aisle, turned around and said very loudly, do you want breasts or thighs for dinner? At which point, he's gone, he's out. Now, a few days later, James had this habit, as a minority of gay men did, dressing up in different costumes in the early 80s. And one of these was modelled on a band called The Village People, which you probably don't know because you're too bloody young. And there was a biker costume, and James used to wear this all the time, and it really upset me because we walked down the street and everyone would be looking at us. And I said, it's just embarrassing, you're drawing attention to yourself. One day I decided to prove my point. So what I did was I dressed up in James's gear, and we set off down Holland Park. If you are not familiar with what the look was, this is it. I didn't manage the moustache, obviously because it was before lunch. But we set off down Holland Park, and we'd been on the road for about 3 minutes, when to my horror, I see an ex-girlfriend from university walking towards us. What can I do? Can I explain this is a really interesting sociological experiment that I do? But I'm screwed, because James, with a small gesture, touches my arm as I'm introduced. That's it. Forever, in my ex-girlfriend's eyes, I was changed forever. Let's go back to the monkey again. Now, we thought this was a great idea. We had 2 funny scenes. We thought this was a great idea for a TV series. Now, my point here is that when you come up with an idea, you have to think it through. You have to think it through before you get found out. We had 2 funny scenes. Supermarket. Funny costume. 2 guys, completely at home with their sexuality, live with each other, but actually they're not. We got commissioned by a very legendary comedy producer called Humphrey Barker. We did stand-up on this thing. It was brilliant. We wrote the sitcom. Didn't get it away. We wrote the movie. Didn't get it away. Because in the end, what was it about? It wasn't really about anything. It kind of didn't really have a narrative. It was about 2 friends and a lot of jokes. Now, you know, you could say that Seinfeld did very well with that, but in this instance, it was found out. One thing that's important, as I mentioned earlier, is narrative. And it's, you know, that may seem obvious to you, but it isn't always obvious. I'm working on a movie at the moment about the London Marathon. Great idea, you know, obvious idea, and it's 6 different people who are running the marathon, so it's a multi-strand narrative. So you write about 20 characters to get these 6 characters, and then you kind of audition them on paper, you kind of work out who's going to work and who isn't. Then it got to a race, so Act 1, the movies tend to be in 3 acts. Act 1, why are they running? Act 2, get ready. Act 3, filming the race, film the race. But 14 of these stories, they just turn up and run the marathon. So what? What's the audience going to make of this? What are they going to do? They're going to drop out of the movie. So what we discovered was that within each race, the character had to have a narrative. Something had to happen within the race to that character, whatever it may be. Which was a challenge, but it's not enough for the audience. You have to deliver at the end. Writing a screenplay that has the power to play, and I changed it from power of play to play, that's okay. The point about it is, it's always about selling. When you first have an idea, as with anything else in life, you have to convince yourself. Because if you don't, somewhere down the road, if you gloss over something, or if you don't deal with it, somewhere down the road, someone's going to find you out. And it's a major mistake if you don't do this properly. If there's a flaw, it will come back. You will be found out after months of work. The other couple of things that I think are really important for successful screenplays and to enable them to work are, and I know this may sound crass, but I'm not really sure I care, is truth. You have to have truth in the movie. The modern cinema audience is very literate, very cinema savvy, and if you try and manipulate them emotionally or lead them down a path they don't want to go, they'll drop out of the movie, believe me. And the second is, I believe that the power of a script to play to an audience is in direct proportion to its universality, the universality of its themes. So if it's something around a kitchen table, a family drama, people have to be able to relate to that. When I wrote Jack and Sarah, people related to it, went to see it, not because their wives had died in childbirth, but because they related to something. Everyone had experienced grief. It was a universal theme. If it's an action movie or a power, a fantasy movie, it's got to have aspiration that will be felt the same way in Tokyo, London, Rio, St. Andrews. It's got to have that universality for it to succeed. Good ideas are hard to come by, but they do have a tendency to stick around. They linger in the back of your mind until one day you crack them. And once you've decided on your idea, you have to be really resilient, because you will face criticism, rejection. It's always easier to say no in the movie business, but you have to be able to listen and take on board criticism, constructive criticism, because often it will help you. And more often than not, if a note really, really annoys you and really gets under your skin, it's because you've always known it's true and you haven't faced up to it. I'm going to leave you with a couple of things. The first is an anecdote about my daughter sitting there. On the school run years and years ago, we were driving to school, and they were about 4 or 5 at the time. And a movie project of mine had foundered that morning before breakfast, as they often did. And I wasn't in a particularly good frame of mind, when this little voice piped up from the back of the car and said, "Daddy." "Yes." "I've had a really good idea for your work." "Oh, yes, darling." "And what would that be?" "Well, why don't you write something that someone actually wants to make?" Out of an ounce of bait. But it has to be said, there's a lot of truth in that. And it's kind of what I've been talking about. Now, the last thing I want to leave you with is a piece of advice that I got when I was a student and has held me in great stead all my life. It's not as profound a source as James Hilton's Buddhist monk. But I want to give it to you, and I want you to remember it. It actually came off the back of a pork pie wrapper. And it said, "Keep cool and eat within 24 hours." Thank you.